months, years, and centuries did humankind turn their back against what made them beneficial, their flora and fauna. We were deaf for the whining of animals and blinded for the withering of plants. But our negligence brought color to what anymore cannot be seen beautiful. And why is that?
We are blinded by our own personal gains as individuals.
Carlos Linnaeus in 1745 was the first one to use the term fauna, which comes from the Roman goddess Faunus, the goddess of earth and fertility. It is also related to the spirit of the forest, the fauns. Fauna is all wildlife in any region or time. Many of the greatest biologically diverse locations on Earth are found in India. India's political borders cover a vast variety of ecoregions, including deserts, mountain ranges, highland, tropical and temperate woods, swamp, floods, and meadows. The Himalayas, the Indo-Burma area, and the Western Ghats are three of its biodiversity hotspots. Fauna plays significant role to the ecosystem, more specifically to the carbon dioxide cycle.
Carbon cycle naturally occurs in the atmosphere, land, or water. As anthropogenic carbon emissions rise, more carbon is released into the atmosphere than is stored, tipping the carbon cycle and global climate out of balance. According to some case studies, the magnitude of carbon uptake or release caused by a single animal or a group of animals in a region's ecosystem can rival that caused by human-caused emissions from fossil fuels. Therefore, managing and restoring wildlife populations has the potential to significantly lessen the effects of climate change worldwide. According to a study, animals have the ability to increase or decrease biogeochemical processes with at least a median change of 40%. Plants are considered as the well-known removal of carbon and greenhouse emissions, but a new analysis of researchers in Stanford University found that large forest animals also plays an important role in carbon cycle.
Changes to biophysical settings, ecosystems, biodiversity, and natural resources brought on directly or indirectly by people are referred to as having an anthropogenic influence or human impact. Globally, human activities such as population growth, excessive consumerism, overexploitation, pollution, and deforestation all adversely affect the environment. Some of the problems, like global warming and biodiversity loss, have been labeled as grave threats to the human race's continued existence. Human impact adversely affects invasive species due to the crucial role that carbon dioxide plays in our environment. Carbon cycle feedback is created to maintain the global temperature within predetermined ranges and guarantee that the climate is never too hot or cold for life on Earth. This process serves as an extensive illustration of Le Chatelier's theory. According to this theory, if a balanced reaction is stopped by the addition or removal of a reactant, the behavior of the remaining reactants will be altered in an effort to bring the chemical species' original concentration back to its original level.
Given that direct and indirect anthropogenic effects are the main cause for invasive species. Invasive species are existing organisms that are not native to a particular area. What happens when a particular animal gets introduced to a new environment? There are two options. They adapt and conquer, or they are left to decay in an unfamiliar environment. Natria, for example, is a rodent in the United States that is known for their high reproductive rate, which leads to an uncontrolled spread of population. During the 1930s, the Natrias were introduced to the USA, and eventually their population continued to grow until the early 2000s and so on. This occurrence happens to other species like ramshorn snails, carps, or even rabbits. To further understand the mechanics of the existence of invasive species, epigenetics is a factor that contributes to their invasive capabilities. Well, the next reporter will now tell us how epigenetics works.
Epigenetics is the science of how environmental factors and behavior can alter how our genes function. Or simply, it pertains to DNA modifications that switch on or turn off genes. An example of this is DNA methylation and histone modification. DNA methylation functions by introducing a chemical group to DNA. This addition blocks the proteins attached to DNA and may prevent the expression of some genes. Typically, methylation turns the genes off, while a reaction called demethylation turns the genes on. Histones are proteins that DNA wraps around. Without them, DNA would be too long to fit inside cells. So if histones bind DNA too tightly, the DNA cannot be read by the cell. Studies have demonstrated that epigenetic changes can result in cellular adaptations that affect health, stress sensitivity, and behavioral changes as they infiltrate through several life periods. And additionally, some of these alterations may be inherited by future generations.
Cycle is enormous. This is largely to the acts of humans that directly affect the environment. Actions such as environmental exploitation, deforestation, and fossil fuel burning critically affect and change the dynamics of the carbon cycle in the atmosphere. The naturally occurring carbon cycle is then made out of balance due to the addition of anthropogenic carbon emissions. Fauna from ecosystems has an important role in carbon cycle as mediators of carbon sequestration, which is a process that reduces excess carbon. Preservation and restoration of different species of wildlife is crucial to balancing the carbon cycle. However, humans have influenced the loss of biodiversity of fauna due to environmental exploitation. This loss of biodiversity can also be affected by the invasive species that are introduced directly or indirectly by humans.
Best in the layman's term, the humankind is the cause of the invasion of flora and fauna, or the animals and plants, which leads to climate change and other environmental hazards. Although these animals and plants play an important role in the carbon cycle, considering their capability to balance the carbon, still, the human's daily activities brutally affect the cycle in terms of the large emission of carbon. But nothing's too late as long as we all are willing to change for the better.
Prevent invasion. We started it, we can stop it.